Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to a special edition of Innovation Guelph, Leaders Helping Leaders. This session is organized by Innovation Guelph in partnership with the City of Guelph's Economic Development Team, the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And I'm your host for the session today. I'm Mickey Campo, a Program Manager at Innovation Guelph. It's my absolute pleasure today to welcome you to today's session on Leaders Helping Leaders, Rebuilding the Post-COVID-19 Supply Chain. To support entrepreneurs navigating the COVID-19 crisis, Innovation Guelph, a nonprofit regional innovation center that helps companies start, grow, and thrive, has created this series of online sessions to help business owners and leaders maintain momentum, continue innovating, and leverage opportunities to help them through the many challenges and opportunities that this crisis brings with it. Today's Leaders Helping Leaders session will be co-presented by Stephen Karpenko, the Senior Expert Advisor, Business Capacity and Readiness Branch, Business Partnerships and Programs Division of the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade for Ontario, and Andrey, Bolgov, Business Development Consultant, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and Gemma, Duley, Industry Specialist at Innovation Guelph with more than 26 years of experience in project management, Lean Six Sigma, process engineering, supply chain, and team building. And last but certainly not least, joining us for an interactive Q&A session after the presentation, Christine Chapman, Acting Manager, Economic Development for the Economic Development Infrastructure, Development and Enterprise for the City of Guelph. Welcome to all of you. So before I hand the reins over, I do need to let you all know that today's session will be recorded. It will be shared on Innovation Guelph's YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. So please turn off your videos and mute your mics during the presentation. We have set aside some time to have an interactive Q&A period after the lesson. So please raise your hand or submit a question by either using the icon at the bottom of your screen or by typing into Zoom chat option at any point throughout the presentation today. Please address any of your questions to either everyone in the chat or directly to me, Mickey, or to Wes, both co-hosts of this session here today. We will make sure that the presenters get a chance to address as many of your questions as possible during the final 30 minutes of today's session. So after the Q&A, there will be a quick poll. If you could just kindly wait until the very end of today's session to sign off, please answer those questions before leaving here today. That would be greatly appreciated. So it's quick and harmless, I promise. Anyhow, I do want to pass things over. So without further ado, Stephen, off to you to get things started.
Thanks, Mickey. I will get that going now. And there we go. Anyway, thank you very much and welcome everyone. I'm going to present on the Ontario Together Fund, which is a fund that was started by the Ontario government. And when we have a talk about supply chain, the biggest aspect right now is the getting through the crisis and into reopen mode. So anything that affects everything in the supply chain, whether it's on the manufacturing end, right through to transportation, handling, and to consumer delivery or business-to-business delivery, the handoffs, or wherever they are, they're going to be affected by companies' access to personal protective equipment. And that was the original spirit of starting the fund. There we go. So just an overview of the fund. At the beginning of April, we launched, like I said, $50 million. And the purpose then, so if you go back a couple months, we really were in crisis mode. And the shortages of PPE in the supply chain were, I think, one of the biggest fears of everyone, knowing that until we resolved that, we weren't going to get anywhere. And it started with the medical care in the hospitals and their access, and then frontline workers. And now we're talking about reopening and how that affects literally every business. So protection not only of the health and welfare of workers and employees, but also customers. And so that the fund is really all about spurring on the innovation that was required, encouraging companies to pivot away from traditional manufacturing. Let's say that their business took a hit and orders decreased. With excess manufacturing capacity, we were basically asking the supply chain, are you able to pivot and deploy some of your manufacturing capacity to helping with the PPE supply literally crisis at the time? And since in the last 2 months, we've had amazing success, and the fund is very much thriving. And I'll just go through some of the details now. So I mentioned the why. Who is the fund available to? Well, it's to pretty much any, not just manufacturers, although that was the original intent and the original focus was on shoring up the supply of PPE, but it's now expanded to include all sorts of innovations. And I'll give you an example of something that you may not think of right off the bat, which is kind of the mental health and welfare frontline workers. And we've had people applying for the Ontario Together Fund who are clinical professionals in this area, basically saying, hey, we can pivot from an in-person counseling type of service to something that's virtual and help people stay in the game and on that front line and make sure that their families are supported. And those are applications that we saw come in. So those were innovations within an existing industry that were geared to helping us all get through this and get up and running. So the fund has addressed many kinds of innovations. So originally the manufacturers, but now for all of you business owners out there, if you haven't heard of the fund yet, or you were thinking of, how can I help? We've even expanded the scope to include volunteerism and people who say, hey, I can do stuff. I'm not really available 100% of the time, or I'm still open for business and still up and running, but I would like to help. We actually have a channel for that as well. So eligible projects are those that provide those innovative solutions, literally across a wide range, but the overall mission or purpose of the fund is for COVID-19 support through the crisis and to get everybody back open for business. And it starts with the PPE, but then any of the other support services. And you know your businesses and how you might be able to fit in. That would, if that applies to you, then certainly consider applying for the fund. A lot of companies, part of it is procurement, where companies are saying, hey, we don't need your money, but wouldn't it be great if you could connect us with buyers of what we can provide? And we're doing that as well. But the first step down at the bottom there is to submit to the Ontario Together portal. And so this is a shot of it. It's changing literally every day. I think now instead of having 4 boxes, there's 6, 5 or 6, but just represents the fact that as we get closer to reopening, the needs are changing. But in terms of the procurement and the original purpose of the fund, it's been pretty amazing. We've issued over 250 purchase orders to PPE suppliers through the procurement stream, and that's been really amazing because the healthcare system is purchasing PPE. We are procuring on behalf of other people who come in. So part of the Ontario Together portal is ontario.ca/PPE, where we're actually connecting sellers and buyers. So many businesses are saying, well, I need to reopen. Although right now, I think we're aware that there aren't any specific guidelines in terms of this is the proven solution, this is exactly what you need in terms of opening, whether you're a retail business or manufacturer. I don't think we have those guidelines out there yet, but what we're starting from is, okay, let me protect spaces. And so at a cashier station where you see the barrier, the plexiglass barrier between the customer and the cashier, that's an example of kind of engineering the protective environment, wearing gloves, masks, in certain cases, gowns. That's really where we're starting. And so we're using the ontario.ca/PPE to connect buyers who are saying, I need some of that, and maybe not even a large quantity, a small quantity. Where do I get it? That you can go to the portal for that. So another innovation is mentioned kind of in the middle of the slide. There are things like 3D printing and 3D printed swabs. So if you have the ability to do that kind of thing, you're saying, hey, I could do X. Hand sanitizer has been a big thing. So people pivoting away from, let's say, bottling beverages and filling bottles with different liquids to filling them with hand sanitizer and getting that in the supply chain. So that's been a big part of it as well. So the application process starts on the portal. So you can Google the Ontario Together Fund, or when Mickey distributes the slides to you, there's links on the slides, but it's pretty easy to find. And that's the starting point, is where you go in, and it's a fairly simple initial application where just filling out some fields in terms of what's your idea, and some general description of the project and some history about your company. That's enough to get the ball rolling. And based on that, we have literally dozens of people who are processing these applications on a daily basis, looking through them. Obviously, not all qualify. There is a lot of stuff that's coming in kind of on a startup basis that really isn't ready to go. And if you can imagine, given the kind of crisis and need to reopen quickly that we're facing, that time sensitivity is important. So if somebody comes and says, well, hey, I'm just starting up, here's an idea, but we won't be ready for some time, or we need a ton of cash, those probably are less likely to be considered. But certainly everything is triaged at the beginning. And then once a company has been considered to be qualified, and part of that is one of the things we ask for is 2 years of financial statements. So that kind of disqualifies a lot of startups. And what we have seen, however, are maybe there's innovation that would be considered a startup, but then partnering with a more established company who maybe has the ability to move the product or to provide safe handling and has that 2-year track record. So we do see some partnerships forming, and they kind of coming together on a single application. So I mentioned a lot of the eligibility criteria. Again, go to the portal and see what's opening up. We've had one, we call them challenges, where we're basically saying, hey, if you have an e-commerce solution, we're interested in hearing from you. If you have a volunteer idea, we're interested in hearing from you. And just considering things, I think we've done 8 or 9 different kind of challenge streams or challenge tracks in order to provide a focus not only for the applications, but also for the team who's evaluating them and moving things through that way. So down at the bottom, funding support grants up to 75% of eligible costs to a maximum of $2.5 million. And so that's a fairly large project. Those larger ones especially are approved right at the minister level. So these things go right to the top. Once you filled out the application, the brief form on the portal, if you kind of qualify beyond that, then somebody will contact you and ask for a more detailed business case where written details are provided and the supporting financial documentation, etc. So you can see some of the things that are on that business case: company experience, project and solution, cost, timing, deliverables. We ask about risks. Is there anything that could impact you or prevent you from delivering? There's alignment with the needs that I've mentioned in terms of priorities and timing. One of the expectations is that all of the projects would be completed by end of March 2021. So we're already well into 2020. So that's kind of a 9-month timeline for completing all of the deliverables of the project that would be mentioned in the application and funding request. So that's a fairly tight timeline, and that is a very important criteria. So assessments are done in a timely manner, approved by the minister, and once that's done, you'd be asked to enter into a funding agreement with the province, and we would provide the funds, and there would be certain conditions in terms of are your taxes all paid up, I think is one of them, and various other things related to confidentiality. And also, people have asked about intellectual property. To my knowledge, there's no need to transfer intellectual property to the government as part of the agreement. So that provides kind of clean air for the company to operate and innovate without being worried that one day they'd be cut off by someone else who's doing the exact same thing. So for additional information, there's a couple links. Don't worry about taking them down. Mickey's going to provide the slides. And I welcome you to join the fund. You can imagine with that March 31st, 2021 deadline for completion of projects, that the fund will only be open for the window for so long. There's no announced close date. But you can imagine that that once that window closes, the focus will be on getting the funding into the company's hands, getting the companies up and running and producing. So it could be any time. Therefore, if you have an idea or an innovation you want to put forward, please do so. And we welcome it, and we thank everyone for, we're all in this together, and we thank everyone for the contributions now and in the future. So thanks a lot, and thanks to Innovation Guelph for letting me talk. And I'll pass the presentation over to Andrey, my colleague at OMAFRA, who will carry on the conversation about supply chain.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I would like to thank as well Miki and her team for organizing this. I think it's a great opportunity for us to get together, and with all the restrictions that currently are in place because of the pandemic, I think it's important that the conversation is still going, and we still connect with the supply chain and with companies and other partners as well. I think it's very important. So I really appreciate this opportunity to be here. Yeah, I would like to start, I guess, with one example that I often use these days to illustrate the challenges that food manufacturers are going through right now. And it's the current shortage of bagged flour in the grocery stores. So bagged flour is traditionally a relatively small market compared to the B2B markets of bakeries that are buying flour in bulk and in big quantities, right? So with the COVID-19 outbreak and the resulting closure of restaurants and confinement, however, we see that consumers are baking way more at home than usual right now. So for example, I see lots of photos, these beautiful bread loaves that my friends post on Facebook right now. And so I guess what we see is that the consumer behavior is changing. Consumers are adjusting to the new situation. And the big question these days in this uncertain times is, will this change in consumption last, right? And looking for changes in consumer behavior and trying to identify those that will last for a long time, this seems to be the main focus of food companies at the moment, and not just food companies, everybody really. So now I'd like to give you an overview of OMAFRA's business development team and show you how we interact with and support the food supply chain in the province. So the main goal of business development branch is to retain companies in the province and help them grow. On this slide, you can see the business development team and our coverage in the province. We recently had a reorg, so this is the most current setup of our team. We also have a separate team that covers Northern Ontario, which is not on the map. The main role of business development consultants is in building relationships with decision makers in Ontario food and beverage companies. Our team meets with approximately 1,200 companies each year. I believe, however, this number is probably bigger right now because of the pandemic, and we're trying to ensure that there are no major interruptions to the food supply chain. So there is a bigger outreach right now taking place. So we help existing and new companies connect with different levels of government, depending on the situation they're in. We also help our clients engage with academic institutions, depending on the opportunity or the challenge they're working on right now. So here are some more examples of the work we do. We inform our clients about funding programs, training opportunities, trade shows, and market research. One of the main values of our work for food manufacturers consists in helping them connect with some sales opportunities. It can be a domestic sales opportunity, it can be co-packing partnership, or it can be an international sales opportunity. In the pre-COVID times, we are normally involved in key food trade shows in Ontario, where local companies can have a booth as a part of the Ontario Pavilion. Everything is changing these days, but I hope this overview gives you a kind of idea of what we do and how we can help going forward. So on this slide, you can see some examples of our work with grocery retail. Retailers are always looking for a competitive edge, and our outreach program combined with the knowledge of local food and beverage companies is a great value for them. So we worked in the recent past with all of these companies: Longos, Metro, Whole Foods, Buzeteri, Sobeys, and Farm Boy. And the focus of this work can vary greatly. It really depends on the specific retailer we're working with. It can be, for example, category driven, or it can be a geographic type of opportunity. A new store opens up in a new area, and they might approach us in terms of suggestions of companies, local companies that they could work with. So, for example, a couple of years ago, we helped Farm Boy, a grocery chain originally from Ottawa, with the expansion into Western Ontario. As a result of the program we built for them, they were able to tap into local food companies they didn't know of before. So here's some examples of food trade shows we get involved with. SIAL is a relatively new event for us. We had the Ontario Pavilion there last year for the first time ever. We had 20 companies participating, and I heard lots of positive comments about the experience. It was a great mix between retail and food service buyers. We also organized Ontario Pavilions and Grocery Innovations and Restaurants Canada shows. This way, we help companies create awareness in both retail and food service markets. Again, because of the pandemic, it's hard to say what these events will look like and what our involvement in them will be going forward. So it's a bit of challenge, but it's definitely important events for us going forward as well, we hope. Our team can help you with entering international markets as well, which is especially interesting and relevant, we think, because many companies that lost their food service opportunities are looking for alternative markets. With Europe and China being ahead of us in terms of pandemic, they're already going through reopening the economies, which represents opportunities for our companies here in Ontario. Our team can help you develop your marketing strategy for a new market. We can also help you identify experts in a specific market and help you generate some sales leads. We can help you with compliance research as well, so that you can see what will be required to enter a specific market. And in our work, we leverage connections with trade commissioners. So this is a federal level of government, and they have presence in more than 160 cities worldwide. So I believe this is my last slide, and I'd like to talk to you about a very COVID-19 related project that we're currently involved in. So we're working with the Waterloo Institute for Nanotechnology right now to develop a solution that would stop face shields from fogging up. Face shields have been introduced by some companies in Ontario at their plants to address the need for social distancing. The challenge with this specific item is in cold environments, which is very common for food manufacturers. So when you go with the face shield from cold into the warm environment, your face shield fogs up right away. The challenge is also when you work in the cold environment and the warm air that you breathe out touches the cold surface of the face shield, and it leads again to fogging up. So there are some anti-fog spray and wipes products that companies currently use to address this challenge. However, this gives a solution for just a couple of hours. And after that, you need to reapply this treatment again. So together with the Institute for Nanotechnology, are looking for ways to solve this problem in a more lasting way. And we are looking right now for companies that would like to get involved in this project. So if you find this challenge interesting and would like to get involved, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll put you in touch with research people and also some companies that are working on some prototypes of these facials with anti-fog properties. So this concludes my presentation. Thanks again for this opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, it's over to you, Gemma, now.
Thank you very much, Andrey. It's great to be here today. So let me just switch over to the presentation that I have. And welcome, everybody. I don't know about you, but I just want to talk about the weather a moment, because to me, it has very much to do with the COVID. I definitely see a relationship. We're going through really hot days, which is kind of like like we get good news about the COVID, then we get bad news. So it's kind of like we're having these 32-degree temperature days, and then we get these really, really dreary days. And let me just... So my name is Gemma Duley. I am an engineer from the University of Waterloo is where I got my degree, but I have kind of been all over the place. I am a chemical engineer and have discovered over the years that I have a passion for the food industry, but I also have a huge passion for having people realize the potential that they have in themselves and just unleash that potential, which is why it's always so exciting to do things with Innovation Guelph, just because I love being able to see people take these ideas, these concepts they have, and grow with them. Unfortunately, we come across things such as COVID-19, which can completely sidestep what our plans were for growth. We call this often disruption. And with that disruption, we go through 3 different phases. And Stephen, I stole these from you from Friday when we were having that discussion, because I thought it was a great way of talking about those 3 different phases that we go through. And that is, we have crisis, then we have a reopening, and then we have growth. So we're going to talk a little bit today about those 3 phases, about us going into that new normal, and 3 things that are really going to help us get through all these supply chain changes that we are seeing with this. So just as a start, crisis. This is unfortunately that time that some of us are in right now. We like to think of going through crisis, reopening, and growth as a linear progression, but it isn't. We're all at different phases, in our different businesses, our different industries are at different phases, our communities are at different phases, and most of all, the world. Some of us are in crisis still, where we're figuring out, concerned totally about the people that we are working with, the people we are working for. Are our loved ones safe? Are they secure? Are we providing an environment where we can guarantee as much as possible that our employees are also safe, as well as our customers? In this crisis, some of us have now gone out into that reopening phase, or perhaps we weren't even closed during the crisis. With that reopening, though, we are seeing what they call a bullwhip effect. And this is where we start off small, we make a change, a little bit of a change in what we would normally order, and next thing you know, throughout the whole downstream, everybody has got either huge inventories, short inventories, everything is just going all over the place. But then we hit the growth phase, and that's when we start to take different paths from where we would normally be. At this time, I have asked if we can put up a little bit of a poll. So I would be thrilled if you guys would answer a poll which simply asks you that question of what phase are you in? Are you in your industry, your business, are you still in crisis? Are you reopening? Or are you in that growth phase? Or as I put down there, are you just in a mix? So I'm starting to get some of the results back. The good thing I'm going to look at from this is I'm seeing nobody is still in crisis. Phew, thank goodness. I'm glad that most of you are out of that part of the phase. But we do definitely seem to have people in a mix. Right now, I'm getting about 67% of you are showing that you are in a mix of, I would assume that's the reopening and the growth phases. So some of you might be wondering, why the heck under crisis do I have a picture of a beautiful black swan? Some of you may know that that's actually the term that people use for when you have an extremely unusual, unexpected, rare event. It is called a black swan event. And one of the things with the black swan event is it has that tendency that we turn around and look back and we say, well, this could have been predicted. You think of Bill Gates, who back in 2015 did a TED Talk where he discussed about the fact that one of the next big issues that the world was going to face was going to be an epidemic. Everybody's looking at his speech back in 2015 now and going, why didn't we do anything about it? That's the nature of a black swan effect. Looking back, we can say that we should have predicted it. And that's what we're seeing here is that we have an irrational demand. Who would have ever have thought that toilet paper would be the symbol of the pandemic, of this crisis? People are panicking. They're going out, they're buying things that they would never have bought before, or they're buying in quantities. We are seeing people do hoarding, seeing them grab onto that, or what they're doing hoarding either because they're scared, or they think they can charge people huge amounts and they can make a profit on other people's issues. We're seeing second-tier supplier shortages, and not just second tier, but third tier, fourth tier. When we set up our supply chains and we think about our risk management of it, we have a tendency to look at what is my critical piece of what is the critical raw material that I have, and we forget about the fact that our supplier has suppliers, or we forget about those little things which we are seeing when it comes to that PPE. And then just we're seeing workforce challenges, and the other big thing I think is transportation issues. We're very much used to international travel, and with that international travel comes that idea of our raw materials coming in internationally. So it's not just people not able to go on holidays, but it's the fact that that whole transportation system has slowed down. So, but it's brought on a whole bunch of new ideas. How do we do curbside deliveries? What do we do with the fact that we have a huge increase in the amount of online deliveries? We're really looking at how interlinked are our chains. That brings us into that bullwhip effect, because as we look at how interlinked we have the fact that we've lost demand, but we also have shifted our demand. We have, yes, to talk about the food industry, we're looking at it, and a lot of yourselves and other manufacturers in the food industry are looking at it, that they've moved from their food, a lot of their demand being on the food service side, to their demand now being on retail. So if we think about how Andrey was speaking earlier about flour could have been sold in big, huge bulk containers. because it was going into food service. But now that it's going into retail, you have to look at those differences in packaging. So I imagine many of you are finding that you are having to rethink what is your packaging, simply because you've moved from being to more industrial type sizes into more retail. And that is also included in that shifted demand. So we have that our customers, the consumers themselves, are moving from, say, a retail world, from a food service world into a retail world. You have the fact that people are doing things at home. A lot more people are cleaning out their houses, working on those little projects, even things like that demand for jigsaw puzzles. The amount of requests I've seen on Facebook for people wanting jigsaw puzzles, because it's something that people now have, not so much that they have free time, but it's time that they are at home and they can concentrate on different things. And then, of course, the big one that's going to cause this bullwhip effect is that deferred demand. When are people going to start ordering again? So the big thing that we want to do when we're looking at all of this lost demand, shifted demand, and deferred demand is we want to think about how can we reduce that effect of the bullwhip. On the picture there, you can see it starts off as a nice little change that's happening down by the person's hand. But when we get all the way to the other end of our supply chain, it is huge. And we're going to see that, you think about the demand for flour, for eggs, for yeast, for toilet paper, for all of our cleaning products. People have gone out, retailers have gone out and they've said, oh, I need more toilet paper now. And they've increased their demand. So then the supplier, the distribution center, has increased its demand from its supplier and all the way down. And we're seeing that. So what we need to do is start thinking about how is that demand going to come back into the new normal? And how are we going to be in the future? So what that means is, in terms of those growth, is what are our new routes to our customer? So how is the supply chain going to change for us? I've seen a lot more direct to customer ideas out there. You're seeing producers who are no longer relying solely on those distribution systems that are out there, where they have to go something like to a Gordon's food service to get their product into a store. What they're doing is, you look at a lot of the farmers that are out there who have taken advantage of it, and they have gone online. Come to the farm and you stay in your car, pop your trunk, and we're going to put the food right into your trunk. There's been that kind of thing, just that whole idea of online purchasing. It's definitely there. It's people are marketing to the customer. It's getting your beer delivered to you straight from the brewery now that you can do. It's also that idea of new markets. Again, sticking with the alcohol industry, we have all of our distillers who, we're used to making alcohol products, and well, geez, sanitizer is now has alcohol in it. So we have all of these distillers who are now making sanitation products. So it's a new market. It's not necessarily a path that they want to be on in the long term, but it's always something that they can keep in mind in the future of how do they want to hold on to that new market? Do they want to hold on it? How does it fit with that whole long-term forecast that we're looking at? And so that gets into our new products there. All of this, though, if we want to move to this new normal, is going to rely on three different things. And that's collaboration, it's communication, and it's creativity. I think these three C's are very vital for us to achieve that new normal, for us to come out of this crisis. In collaboration, it's looking at what are our supply chain partnerships. Who are we going to? I occasionally go to a on-farm dairy. And I've looked at the amount of product that they're now offering at this on-farm dairy. And it has increased because of those partnerships where small businesses are turning to other small businesses and saying, hey, let's see what we can do together. This is our opportunity for us to create different ways. As Stephen has talked about, we now have these different hubs for us to be purchasing, whether they be through the government or whether they be through U of T's PPE hub. We have all of these cooperative hubs that are coming out of the community, reaching out and saying, hey, we can help each other here. So it's looking for us to get through this is to say, let's take a different look here and see what different types of partnerships we can develop. It's looking at risk management, not just from the eyes of what is risk to us, but we now need to look at it and say, well, who's our supplier? What are the risks to them? How can we help them manage their risk? It's looking at internal innovation. It's coming back and saying, so, you know, is that a nice to have or is that a need to have? What can we do? And it's looking at it as we've seen so many companies turn and they're now making something in the PPE world. Take, for instance, Canada Goose, which it makes all kinds of jackets. They are now making surgical gowns. So that's looking at what do we have. It's looking at I'm thinking of New Make It in Newmarket, which is a place where people come and they can use tools, and they have now turned that into turning their crafts worker hub into a place that makes PPE. So it's looking at what do we have and can we use it in a different way. So collaborating internally on how we can do that and just finding out where is our agility and where's our flexibility. So often we are told that in order to make it, you've got to think about large batch sizes. Well, especially when you're looking at a situation we're in right now, there's a lot to be said for having small batch sizes because you can switch from one product to another. You can reduce the effect of that bullwhip because you can make those changes. Maybe in all of this, our supply chain partnerships, our agility and flexibility, maybe we don't put in an order to our supplier once a week or once a month. Maybe at this time we need to say, hey, let's start looking at ordering twice a week. We'll only order small quantities, but that gives us an opportunity to move with the flow as we move into that area of growth. Key to all of this, though, is for us to have communication. We have got to be transparent. We've got to be honest with both our upstream people and our downstream people. We need to let them know when we are facing a challenge, just like they need to let us know. Because we all need to be able to collaborate together and be flexible and agile. And that is really going to become key in the supply chain as we move forward, is how do we build those communication channels? Are we strong and vibrant in what we're doing right now? Do we have fast and frequent communication? Comes back to risk management as well. Are we honest with our suppliers, with our customers about where our risks are as far as it goes to our supply chain? We need to have those conversations with our community and the consumer. Partly to let them know that we're trying new avenues. It's all helping to build our brand, our reputation, that we want to be out there. We need to have that conversation with our employees because right now, our employees, they're worried. They're concerned. They're worried about their health. They're worried about their future. Your business might be doing great right now, but they know there is so much going on around them that is so uncertain that they don't have control in. So having communication, you're giving them that ability to have a little bit more control in their life for them to focus on what is going on with you. So we've really got to talk about communicating up and down all of our supply chain channels, all of our other channels that we have out there in our workplace. And lastly, when it comes to creativity, wow. The amount of creativity that has been out there, that has come out, has just been incredible. People are finding so many different ways to do their work. They're finding so many different ways to meet that challenge of social distancing in a workplace. It has been hard. And I know you guys are facing a lot of hard times with it, but it's that creativity that is going to find those new routes, those markets, those products. And you know what? Creativity doesn't mean you have to have really big, huge, wild ideas. It's the simplest ideas. It's having that communication that even if perhaps you're not as creative as you think you need to be at this time, I bet you somebody else in your workplace can come up with an idea. And just a little bit of creativity from them, a little bit of creativity from you, and you've got a lot of creativity. You go out, you communicate, you reach out to your supply chain, to the people who are in your area, and wow, you've got that whole idea of collaboration, communication, creativity, and your supply chain is going to be so much stronger. This is the time we need to be leaders helping leaders and find ways that we can come together and get us through this. So we need to be creative about what are those internal processes. And you know what? There's a lot of new suppliers for things that are out there. We can be creative about who those new suppliers are. We don't need to follow in the paths that we necessarily have followed. We can do things like reach out to the government and help find who our new suppliers are going to be. So at this time, I'm going to start to wrap up here. And what I'd just like to say is right now, over time, we thought we were fairly stable perhaps in our volumes, or that we were on our growth, depending on where we are with our business. And then we hit this black swan event. And then we went into this whole bullwhip, and we're going there, and it's just going all over the place, and we don't know what's happening. Where is that control? But we will get there. We will get to that growth phase. And the way that we're going to be able to do it is by having that collaboration, by having communication and creativity. There is a huge amount of our supply chain that is not going to change, and we don't want it to change. There's a reason why our supply chains have grown as they have. But we need to also look at maybe there's ways to do things a little bit differently and take opportunities for us to go forward. So I hope at this point in time that each of you, you're saying that you're in that reopening growth phase. So I'm so glad that you're through that crisis phase. I'd love to hear what is some of that collaboration and communication and creativity that you've brought to help you now move from the reopening into growth to getting you through this bullwhip. And so at this time, I'm going to send it back to our moderators here and open the platform to each of you. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Gemma. And Stephen and Andrey as well. We're going to start some question and answer period right now. And I'm going to actually kick it off with Christine Chapman from the City of Guelph. So Christine, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me? Okay, there we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Chapman. I work in the Economic Development Office at the City of Guelph. I just wanted to quickly thank all of our presenters and Innovation Guelph for hosting this awesome webinar. I know I've taken a lot away from it, and I'll likely be tapping into many of you as we continue to move through this recovery phase. As a reminder, just wanted to let you know that for businesses in Guelph, your Economic Development Office is here to help. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to bizinfo@guelph.ca. It is consistently monitored, and we can help to redirect you to the area or service that can answer your questions if we can. Also a reminder that we put out weekly bulletins. The Mind Your Business newsletter has increased frequency to once a week on Monday mornings. There is an update of all of the webinars, all of the funding, any of the announcements specific to COVID. That helps as a one-stop shop for all things related to the upcoming 2 weeks for COVID. I mean, I think we had almost 19 webinars on this last week. So, you know, it's a great place to really quickly shop around for what's available to businesses. And please also remember to follow us on Twitter and Facebook for any updates. Also, good news stories. We want to hear about those good news stories that are happening in Guelph. Reach out to us at bizinfo@guelph.ca, and we can help to share your good news stories, especially related to some of these supply chain challenges around PPE and the retooling of existing spaces in Guelph. There's a lot of really good work going on out there. We want to be able to promote that to others. So thanks very much for the opportunity to say something, Nikki, and looking forward to the question period.
Excellent. So with that, I would like to open up the question and answer period. So if you have any questions, you can either type them down or you can let us know you have one by raising your hand and we can unmute you for some questions. I think Wes actually has a couple already.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of questions come in here. One here for all of you, but I think this is also more for Gemma as well. Do you think domestic manufacturers can successfully compete with countries like China that typically have extremely low production costs? And if so, do you feel we're going to see an increase due to the difficulties in fulfilling our supply chains in North America?
It's always been a challenge to deal with a country that has such low production costs. What we're seeing though here is I think our domestic manufacturers, producers do have that opportunity to take advantage of the situation, because we knowing that we have that smaller supply chain, that things like COVID, you know, they talk about it's something that could potentially be reoccurring every you know, it's going to have a season during the year when it potentially could come back. There's going to be other issues that are out there. So I think it's really what we have to focus on in our domestic markets is that idea that we can have that connection, shorten that supply chain, makes us so much more agile and flexible in responding to anything that might be going on. So it's making sure that people understand the value of what you are bringing, greater than it is just the fact that, oh, it's 5 cents less if you go with somewhere like China. That, yeah, but that extra 5 cents that you're paying is bringing so much more into what we are doing and making us so much more flexible and agile in what we are doing. Thank you.
Okay, another question we received here. Can companies get financial support from Ontario regarding purchase of PPE during COVID-19, and where would they apply for that?
Well, I guess I'm the Ontario guy here on the panel. Well, actually, Andrey, maybe you can answer that. I don't have a direct answer. Maybe that's something I can get back to you on. Certainly because to my awareness, that part of things hasn't really changed. There are a number of the federal funding programs you're aware of in terms of wage subsidies and that kind of thing. But as far as like a procurement support, I'm not aware of anything yet. But at the same time, it's such an urgent need that if a business was to, you'd hope that either through the different lending programs that are out there. So the federal government has the up to $40,000 loan. The Export Development Canada and the Business Development Bank of Canada both have lending programs related to that. I'm hoping that those at least provide the kind of cash flow and additional funding that a company could say, hey, this is for reopening, and not have to support or present credit worthiness in the same way that the lenders could certainly step up and fill that cash flow gap related to incremental cash needs to reopen for PPE. As far as a grant program, I'm not aware of anything, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or it's not coming. So I'll do a little look into that and get back to Mickey, and hopefully we can share something. But if not, maybe just time will unveil something as that moves into the critical part of reopening. I just want to come back to something that Gemma said about the supply chain. And in my day job prior to COVID-19, what I work with is companies on technology adoption. And part of that kind of wage differential, whether it's between us and China or between us and the United States, is the growing productivity gap that we saw certainly with the US in the last 2 or 3 years. And one of the ways to close that is through adopting technology. And so if you see an opportunity like Gemma described in terms of shifting supply chain, opportunity to kind of step into the market and substitute, say, a made in Ontario product substitute a made in China product with a made in Ontario, for example, in the short term, that opportunity may just be based purely on crisis in the supply chain that Gemma talked about, or maybe some creativity that you're able to bring to the fore in the short term. But the question is long term, is it a good time in conjunction with new opportunities to look at investments in tech adoption in order to boost productivity and reduce your cost per unit of output? And that's certainly something that we were looking at even pre-COVID, was to encourage companies to look at their administrative systems in terms of their enterprise planning and order management, and also on the back end in terms of integrating their operational systems and quality control in order to not only improve productivity and lower cost per unit, but also to improve the user experience, whether it be through order throughput or reduce defects. So there's different things, but I would say to complement what Gemma was saying, great time to look at tech adoption opportunities and maybe do something that you were planning on before, and as things open up, maybe it's time to put that back on the front burner.
Interesting. Can you guys speak a little bit more to the need for this tech adoption and the automation of so much that is happening in businesses right now?
So I guess I can jump in on that one. So I think what we're seeing in the food supply chain, it has been deemed essential, right? So most companies were able to, I mean, food manufacturers, right? Restaurants, of course, they are closed, but if you're looking at food manufacturing, beverage manufacturing, so those companies were able to continue during the outbreak. And so what we're seeing, and the trend already existed in the past, the need for more automation. So what Gemma mentioned, like the batch sizes are getting smaller, the packaging is getting smaller as well, right? As companies are trying to pivot from food service, right? We would see more bulk type of shipments, and restaurants would take some of that further processing and do that themselves. So what we see is that companies are trying to adjust, and that means that they need to invest into packaging, right? So technology that they might not have right now, and also be more agile, quicker, right? So it's smaller quantities, smaller packaging, yet it needs to be done on a quick type of basis. So it's a challenge, and as a company, you need to decide, okay, do I what is the priority, right? So which opportunity, what do I invest in first? And yeah, it's a challenge. And again, as I said before, I think the uncertainty that I guess we're all in right now, and we're trying to understand which patterns are here to stay and which patterns are just a reaction to the crisis that we're in. So that's really the exercise that we need to do and need to continue doing, I guess, to understand that and to make informative and good decisions that will help companies in the long run as well. And I think that automation is definitely the way out, and we probably will see more investments in that space going forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andrey. Wes,
Actually,
over to you.
Mickey,
Oh,
so
yeah, sure,
just
Gemma.
a comment there about that is we often think when we think of innovation and automation that it has to be in our actual manufacturing processes, that it is putting robots in. When we are thinking about automation, I challenge all of you to think about those back office things that you have going on and where can it be automated. How many times do you have something that has to be touched by 3 or 4 people? You know, that somebody, if they were requesting a pen from Staples, think about what is your process for doing that. And that's how you can actually start to look at some of the ways of adding automation to minimize those type of things so that it is not 5 people needing and the president, you having to decide that, yes, we're going to buy 1 pen from Staples. No, what is your processes for automation in that respect? So don't think of it purely as what is it from a production, manufacturing, big, huge pieces of equipment, big, huge pieces of computers. No, it's innovating automation into those small tasks that we do every single day. Thank you, Mickey.
Good point. Good point, Gemma. Thank you. No. Wes, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got another one here. We've found our costs have been increasing during the COVID crisis. They've mentioned purchasing PPE, decreases in efficiency, increases in shipping costs. Should we look at making changes to our supply chain, increase our prices, or do something else?
That's a really good question. Yes, we have all seen those. I would look at your supply chain. I would look at the risk that is in there. And I can't answer that question whether you do need to increase those costs, because unfortunately I cannot say that, yes, these costs are going to continue to increase. There is a certain amount of leeway we can say in our consumers right now that they're willing to pay a little bit more. They understand what is that this whole situation is putting an impact, a cost on things, but at the same time they're also pushing back and saying, hey, I don't have a job anymore, I can't afford, you know, you raising your prices. So this is, you really need to look at what is that price sensitivity that you have, and almost, so rather than looking at it, what's the sensitivity in, say, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year increments, you're going to just have to pull it back a little bit and say, okay, so this is what our pricing strategy is going to be for the next short little while. And then we're going to reevaluate it again in 3 months when we know where we are a little bit more and see what's happening. So I wouldn't say go right out and just say, you know what, we're going to increase costs now. No, think about it in those smaller terms and looking, but I do encourage you to look at that supply chain to see maybe there are some differences that can be done there. Maybe you can do a combination of different supply chains, have a hybrid type of approach where there are some things that you are going directly to fellow leaders here to get those supplies versus going through a big distribution system that is out there, or going to those hubs that the government has put out. So I would suggest looking at your supply chain, seeing where it is, but realizing you're really going to have to be narrowing your timeframes and really realizing that you're going to have strategies for several much shorter timeframes, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Another question came in here. You mentioned earlier frequent communication and updates being important. How do we keep communication fresh and meaningful?
Sometimes it's just having that honest update. I'm keeping it fresh and meaningful. Sorry. It is looking at it fresh and meaningful, and having it frequent might not necessarily mean that you have to have a formal letter that goes out every single day. It's having strategies for little bits of conversation. So that's what's going to keep it fresh and meaningful. Is there are big things, like I've looked at a bunch of different organizations that are out there, and there are some where the CEO and owners of the company, the only statements that they've come out with to their employees is, this is the most recent change, so you guys are being laid off. That's it. And then you get other organizations where every week the CEO is sending out a note and saying, hey, I hope everybody's doing okay. These are the little changes. We still don't know answers here. Everything is changing. We're focused. We have a group who is looking at when can we start getting people back in the office. We have another group who are looking at this. And so it's that kind of a communication, you know, they're doing it on once a week, once every 2 week kind of frequency. Speaking to, you don't need to put out a new Twitter every day saying, oh, everybody, everything's great, or, oh, no, we hit a bump. You really need to think about what is that message that you want to get across. And sometimes it's turning to your supplier and saying, hey, we've got we're working on a plan. Your supplier you might communicate every 2 weeks with, depending on how your reopening is going. But it's really thinking about that audience and saying, is it just, I just need to do a quick check-in with them? I need to let them know, hey, you know, we have a plan to be opening our doors in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be needing help from you to make sure that we have the right supplies there. It's looking at what are those bite-sized chunks of communication we can have versus having to make it a big, huge episode every single time we speak to people.
And if I could jump in, and I'm kind of like more of a nuts and bolts approach of one of the things that I've seen certainly in my own customer experience and just in general observing stuff as part of my own job as an advisor is connecting with loyal customers and going through and making sure that your focus is on those orders that you have and those customers who, if you're in retail, those customers who are walking past your door, and making sure that you're connecting with them. So when you think of creating fresh communication, maybe looking at what you're doing today, what you did in the past, and maybe it's not a great leap in terms of creativity to go from what you were doing to what you need to do now in terms of making those connections. And it could just be as simple as communicating, hey, on your storefront, this is what we're doing. We're open for business. Here are our hours. Here's our kind of our quality service promise, whatever that happens to be, making sure that all those communications are up to date and current. How many of us have, through the recovery, had the experience where we thought a store was open and it's not, or we thought we could maybe buy a certain product or in a quantity and found out we couldn't? And those sort of things, those are all communication things that you can handle today that don't require a high level of creativity, but they require action. And that would be one thing. It was interesting in terms of going back to the question about raising prices or passing on costs, and I think Gemma nailed it, which is that people, they perceive value, and again, your loyal customers are the closest link to you in terms of the value you've added before, the value you can add now, and them appreciating that and maybe willing to pay a little extra. I read a study just this morning that's saying that so far the fiscal stimulus plans that have been put in place have compensated for or even overcompensated so far in terms of the losses that people have found, and that also we're saving a little bit more. And so the combination of those two things is that so people they have money. It's not kind of across the board. People tightening up, that again, coming back to that connection. And I'm a great believer that and so it's sort of like a thing you have to assess, which is do I pass on an extra cost to a customer in the short term and risk losing them versus just passing it on and saying, hey, this is something I need to do to keep my doors open. I hope you understand it's short term, but the main thing being very transparent about any of that goes on, that it's kind of a separate line item on the receipt so that people see that and get a feel that it's a short term thing and that you don't sort of sacrifice that very valuable customer loyalty in the short term.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I feel kind of a message through all of this is this transparency. So not the oversharing that we know lots of people who overshare sometimes too. It's not so much the oversharing, but it's being that transparent and having the message and being able to communicate with your people and with your clients so that there is this overwhelming understanding of we're in this together, right? So is there, Wes, do you have any additional questions at all?
There was one more here. What is our responsibility to audit or look at what steps our suppliers are taking to minimize the spread of COVID-19?
Is that when anybody wants to attack?
Wow, that's a that's a dangerous one. I think the big thing that I am seeing that's coming out of this whole COVID-19 thing is that we're really starting to see what's important to companies, whether it truly is just profit or whether it's people. Where is that care and concern? Who's just in it to do that make a buck? Like we've seen those where supplies have been basically hijacked at a dock, at a port, because somebody with money actually came along and said, I don't care that that supply is supposed to be going to customer A. I've got cash right here, and you know what? I'm going to take it in my truck. Just, you know, nobody has to know that you I gave you an extra bribe there. So we're seeing that kind of message, those people who are going online and selling products at 5 times the price just because they can. So it's more about, I think, the message that you want to be sending to your customer, that you're caring about people, and that includes knowing that your supply chain is also caring about people. If that's important to you, then that's something that you go and you audit. Well, you don't necessarily audit, but you have that communication to say, okay, we want to buy from you. We want to buy those supplies from you. What are you doing for your people? And so it's this is a time when I think we're seeing a lot more about ethics coming out in the way that people are doing business. And people, to get back to that adding costs, you know, people are willing to pay a little bit more if they know that that company is supporting everybody who is in their chain. So I wouldn't suggest it means you have to go out and you have to audit, as in go in and have them fill out a very formal audit or something. But I think speaking, again, communicating and saying, hey, what are you doing to ensure that your people are okay? Because after all, that's a risk to you. If they're not taking care of their people and they need to shut down their facility because something happens there, that's a risk in your supply chain. So not necessarily audit, but I do think having that care and concern for downstream as well as upstream is important. So, in my honest opinion.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma. So I think we've come to the end of actual questions, unless anybody else has one last one. I'll put a little call out if anybody wants to ask a question. Now's the time. So I think with that, Wes, could you put up that poll for us? We have a few questions. I'm just going to wrap things up a little bit here. So please, before you sign off, just answer some of these questions for us. That would be great. But basically, you know what? Thank you, Stephen and Andrey and Gemma and Christine. Thank you for joining us today. This discussion, the lessons we learned today. There's been some valuable insight into that Ontario Together Fund and how to apply for funding, how to find information that can help us reopen safely. The expected changes to the global supply chain post-COVID means that we really need to shift our thinking, design smarter, stronger, build more diverse supply chains. We need to ask questions, rethink processes, collaborate, think creatively, and seek more information from ourselves and from others. So I really appreciate that conversation today. I think there was some good tips and information that was shared from all of you. So thank you for joining us. And at Innovation Guelph, well, we are continuing to work remotely. We are still actively finding ways to support our clients and the public through these challenging times with workshops, seminars, panels, and opportunities like these. So please reach out to me by email, mickeycampo@innovationguelph.ca. If you need any support or you would like to be introduced to any one of our presenters here today, IG's talented staff and team of over 60 different industry specialists and mentors are willing to help you through this time and beyond. We definitely know that we are stronger together. So I appreciate you sharing this morning with us. And I just quickly remind you to fill out that lovely poll for us before you go. But I will be sending out this presentation. Hopefully we can edit out some of those technical difficulties, but if not, you get those too. That's what happens in live phone calls. Today just happened to be one of those days. So I do apologize for those technical difficulties, and we will send you a copy of the presentation, post everything up on YouTube, and have the links and everything else sent out to you in the next 48 hours. All right, so I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. The sun is shining. Hopefully the warmth has come with it. And I really hope that you all have a great afternoon. So take care.